Hello, hello. Welcome back, everyone, to your favorite time of the month. It's React Native Meetup London, and it's the November edition. And we've got some super exciting talks coming up from people from Expo and Theoda UK. I know it's only been 2 weeks since the last meetup, but you can never get enough of React Native meetups. So yeah, we're planning to go back to our standard schedule of meetups at the beginning of the month. So this is the React Native Meetup London, and it's sponsored by Theoda. It's the company that I work at. What does Theoda do? We're sort of lean product engineering teams for a tech consultancy. We're London-based, and we work with React Native, TypeScript, Node, AWS, all of those technologies that you can see there. And at the moment, we're hiring. So, if you're interested and you want to work on a React Native project with a small or big client, we're the people to come to for that. Yeah, anything from full stack, tech lead, dev roles, and agile coaches, project directors for biz devs. So you can contact us, Leo, me, Arahan, or Mo, the organizers of the meetup. So yeah, in this meetup, we'll be continuing the Expo series. We kicked it off last month with John and his talk on sort of CI and CD and get iterating your app faster with Expo. And this month, we're going to be having a talk from Charlie Cruzan, who's a software developer at Expo, on notifications in Expo and React Native and how Expo can make that a super nice, super fluid experience. And then our second speaker for this meetup is going to be Deb Ornellas, who's an architect developer at Theodo UK. And she's going to be talking to us about how you can make your mobile apps accessible by or for all your users, and some quick wins that you can use in your app or personal projects or professional projects. So without further ado, I'll introduce Charlie, and he's going to take it away with his talk on Expo notifications.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yes, here we go. You guys should be able to see my screen. Cool. All right. So hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to be giving an introduction to notifications in React Native and also show you how setup with push notifications can be done really easily with Expo. So first off, introductions. My name is Charlie Cruzan, like Ben said. I work at Expo, where we make it really easy to build awesome React Native apps. So Expo does this by providing a layer on top of React Native. For anyone that's not already familiar with Expo, this layer basically just has a whole bunch of tools and services for your React Native app. I think the one that most people tend to be familiar with is our open source SDK, which has like a ton of libraries for the device camera or notifications, authentication, things like that. We have about 70 libraries total, so it's actually a really like large piece of surface area. But we also have tools for development like the CLI and Expo Go and the new dev client app, which is like a custom Expo Go. It's in preview right now, but a pretty exciting feature. And then finally launching in the next couple of weeks is EAS, or Expo Application Services, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Cool. So enough introductions. What are notifications? I'm sure everyone here has received a notification before, of course, but at their simplest, it's a pop-up message that appears on a user's device. These are really useful for things like alerting your users about certain events or driving up engagement, like when an app sends you those messages that are like, hey, haven't seen you in a while, check this feature out. And then also crafting really smooth user experiences. So for instance, if I get a notification to verify my email, by tapping that notification, I should go straight to the screen where I do that thing, verify my email. But notifications are a double-edged sword. So they can be as annoying as they are useful. So you want to be smart in how and when you use them. So for instance, no one likes getting too many notifications or needless notifications, like you can see right there in the screen. And then notifications like late at night or early in the morning also are kind of proven to not be really enjoyable. So both of these are really surefire ways to have users either revoke your notification permissions or worse, uninstall the app completely. So you want to be really smart in the way that you use notifications. Cool. So when we're talking about notifications, there's actually two different types, push notifications and local notifications. So push notifications are initiated off of the device from some server, and then local notifications are exactly what they sound like, scheduled locally inside of your app without any kind of external request being made. And as you can see, both look completely identical to the user, function the same to the user. The one on the top is triggered from a server somewhere, so like an external request. And then the one on the bottom is triggered by making a simple function call in our app to the Expo notifications library. In this case, it's the schedule notification async method. Yeah, so if they both look the same and they both function the same, then when should I use a push notification versus a local one? It's actually pretty easy to kind of break this down. Local notifications are generally much easier and faster to set up but come with a little bit less flexibility. So for instance, like with local notifications, you need to know ahead of time when the notification comes up. Good use cases for this would be anything schedulable, like deadlines or reminders in an app are really good for local notifications. Push notifications, on the other hand, can be initiated and sent whenever, since it's happening on the server side. So this is really good for a chat message is sent and I want to let my user know that they have received a chat message. I would use a push notification to alert them about that. But cons to push notifications are they take more setup. You have to run a server and pay for that server. And then generally they're just like a little bit more finicky because of the credentials and setup that's required. But for our purposes today, we're going to be talking about push notifications specifically, just because they're a little bit more exciting. For local notifications, you can visit the Expo docs and it's pretty simple to get started. Cool. So for push notifications in a React Native app, these are all the steps we kind of have to do for setup. It's not crazy, but it does seem like there's a decent amount of duplicated work here for iOS and Android. But luckily, if we use Expo, we can get rid of basically half this work. And now we're left with 3 pretty simple steps. So getting the token, making a request for a notification to be sent, and then handling that notification in our app code. Once again, Expo makes it even easier for us by providing a couple tools that mean we just have less work to do. So 2 of these tools are the Expo notifications client-side library for all of our in-app code, getting the push token, handling the receival, like setting up listeners, things like that. And then we're going to use Expo's push service to handle all of our server-side work and credentials and all that stuff. All right, cool. So hopping right into it. Getting the token, which the Expo push token is basically just the address where we want to send notifications to. It uniquely identifies an instance of your app on a user's device. And so that's what we're going to be using to send notifications. So let's build this function to collect our token. First of all, we want to make sure that our device can actually receive push notifications. So simulators and emulators can't. They just don't have the capability of receiving push notifications. So if we're not running on a physical device, we're just going to alert and return null. Next, we need to ask the user for permission to send notifications to them. If they don't grant us permission, obviously we should alert and return null. And if they've already granted permissions, this will actually just return granted and not re-ask them again. So that functions really, really smoothly. Okay, now this next piece of highlighted code is a bit of a weird chunk. On Android, there's something called notification channels. And these are basically used to assign particular behavior to notifications like a custom ringtone or a custom vibration pattern. And Expo sets one up by default, but I want to explicitly create one here with the importance set to maximum. Without this, it's possible that when the notification arrives, the Android operating system decides, not really that important of a notification. I'm not going to show the pop-up for it. And we don't want that to happen, so let's just set it to the max to be safe. Cool. And then we just make a call to get Expo push token async, and we have our push token, and it's as easy as that. So with a pretty simple function, like 15 lines of code, we are a third of the way there. Next, let's make our request to Expo and get this notification delivered. So when it comes to sending a request, we have 2 options: using curl in our terminal or some type of server SDK. Expo has a node server SDK that we maintain, and then the community has actually created a ton based off of that one and a ton of other libraries, depending on whatever you need in your backend. In production, obviously, you'd use a server SDK rather than like manually curling in your terminal every time you want to send a notification. But for our talk, we're just going to use curl because it's a little bit easier to show off. Okay, so when communicating with Expo's push service, you actually communicate in 2 parts. So the first request is to actually send the notification, and then we're going to send a follow-up request afterwards to check and make sure our notification was sent successfully. The second request is actually just getting information. It's not doing anything like user-facing, but it's important for us to be aware of any errors that we need to address. Otherwise, we're sending notifications and maybe they never arrive at our device. And it's like, well, how do I debug that? I don't have any error. So it's really important to follow up. Cool. So For our first request, we're just going to be instructing Expo which token to send the notification to, which is our to field, and then a couple fields on what we want in the notification. Here, we're just going to do like a simple hello world notification. And then Expo is going to receive our request and respond telling us whether or not our request was okay. And if it was okay, it'll give us back an ID that we'll use a little bit later on. And it's important to note that just because we received an okay response here, it doesn't actually mean our notification was successful. Because in the background, what Expo is doing is after receiving our request, it sends off a new request to one of two places. Apple Push Notification Service, or APNS for iOS, and then Firebase Cloud Messaging, FCM for Android. And then those native push services will send the actual notification directly to the device, which is the same device specified by our Expo push token in our original request. So that's it. Our notification has hopefully arrived on the device, but we do want to do that follow-up request and make sure that everything went off without a hitch. So we take that ID we received back in our first request and say, hey, Expo, whatever happened with this notification I asked you to send? And Expo is going to be like, oh, yeah, we sent it off to APNS or FCM and should have arrived at the device, totally fine. And so now we've done our error checking, made sure it worked, and that's really great. We are now done with our second step. The device has received a notification. We could theoretically stop here if that's all the behavior that we want. But let's say that maybe when a user receives a notification, we want to take some sort of action in the app, or when a user interacts with the notification, like by tapping it, maybe we want to do something there. Like if our user taps a notification, we open a particular screen in the app. So for that first one, handling notifications while our app is in the foreground, it's actually really, really easy. We're going to add a listener that's called the add notification received listener and provide a callback that will be run whenever a notification comes in. So we can add this listener basically wherever we want in our app lifecycle, but it's usually best practice to add it in the root component, just so that we are assured that it has mounted as early as possible. So if a request comes in for a notification really early on in the app, we've already kind of added this listener and nothing's gonna go wrong, basically. And then also important to note is that our callback, which is the function we're running whenever a notification comes in, will receive the notification itself as an argument. So we can take different behavior depending on content that's in the notification itself. So that's great for handling when a notification comes in and our user has the app open. But what if the app is backgrounded? It would be really nice if we could run some block of code even when the app is in the background. And luckily, using Expo notifications with another library called Expo Task Manager, we can do exactly that. It's a little bit more finicky since, unfortunately, the operating system can actually make its own decision whether or not to wake the app while it's in the background. The most common cause for it not waking the app is like if battery optimization is on. So it's useful to keep that in mind as you're designing user flows and make sure this isn't absolutely necessary that the task is run. Like it's just beneficial to the user, but not vital. Cool. So first off, for background notification handling, we want to define the task that will be run. So this task takes two parameters, an identifier, which is just an arbitrary string, and then the function that we want to run. So here we just have like a dummy function saying fetch some data. One thing that's really important to note is that this function needs to be described in the global scope, so outside of any React Native component. Otherwise, it just won't work the way we want it to. And that's it. Once we have defined our task, we just call notifications.register task async, give the identifier, and anytime a notification comes in while our app is backgrounded, this kind of chunk of code will run, and it's super good for running background fetch requests, for instance. Cool. So finally, let's say our user has interacted with the notification, like by tapping it, and we want to navigate to a certain screen. Since everyone likes React hooks, we're going to use the use last notification response hook here, which is exposed by the notifications library. It functions just like the name suggests. gives you the last notification that our app has received. So some example code, we have our root component here. We'll call our hook. And if the value is not null, we know that the user has tapped or interacted with our notification in some way. And if that's the case, we just use the linking API to navigate directly to a screen, whatever one is defined inside of our notification data, since in each notification, you can kind of add arbitrary like JSON data objects too. Cool. So what if I wanted to handle some even spicier interactions in my app? So for instance, maybe I want my user to respond to a message like directly from the notification pop-up without having to open my app at all. Or maybe I want to give them like a list of options that lets them take some predefined set of actions. This is really easy to add with something called notification categories. But I'm going to leave it as a bonus round for people to read up in the Expo notifications documentation, just because it's a little out of scope. But the good news is that it'll only take like 10 lines of code, so it should be pretty easy for everyone to do. Cool. So we've done all our 3 steps. We've gotten the token, we've sent the request, the notification was sent, and we handled it inside the app code. So our app is ready for production. What happens next? So unfortunately, it's not super uncommon for notifications to work great in development. And then when you ship to production or test in production, it just seems like everything's on fire, meaning your notifications just aren't coming through. But luckily, this is all usually down to the same root cause, which is credentials. Both iOS and Android have their own sets of required push notification credentials. So let's just go through those really, really quick. On iOS, we use something called an APN key or Apple push notification key. Each developer account through Apple is given 2 keys, and you can use these in as many apps as you want. There's no limitation. The good news is that with Expo's build services, if you want, they are completely handled for you. And I usually recommend this flow for basically anyone because it means you don't have to think about your APN credentials at all. And otherwise, you kind of run the risk of accidentally revoking a key if you handle things manually, and that can break push notifications in your app. And I've seen that happen a ton of times already with production apps, and it's pretty stressful and difficult to debug. So Android is a bit different in that it requires a more manual process, which is configuring Firebase or FCM. So it's fairly simple and step-by-step. But if you miss just one step or miscalculate something, then it means notifications won't work. And it's usually a pretty difficult thing to debug. So the best advice I can give is to follow our documentation, be really methodical, and you should be totally fine, hopefully. Cool. So we've gone through basically everything that's necessary when it comes to push notifications in a React Native app and in an Expo app. And just to summarize like my quick pitch for why you should use Expo, Expo basically gives you 3 really useful features. The Expo notifications client library for all your in-app notification code, like getting the push token, setting categories, triggering local notifications, and that kind of stuff. A streamlined notification service, which means very little server setup for you to do. And then finally, credentials management integrated right into the build system because no one likes to think about credentials and permissions. And on the flip side, I also wanted to do a bit of an anti-pitch for Expo's push service, so why you shouldn't use it. For instance, if you've already got like experience working with APNS and FCM directly or some other push service and it's not broken, use that. Why change? Otherwise, if you have a need for a feature that's not available from Expo yet, then obviously in that case, you should also use APNS or FCM. But let us know what that feature is because we're always adding things to Expo's push service, so we'd love to support it soon. The good news is that when you build your app with our new build service called EAS Build or Expo Application Services, you aren't locked into any of Expo's libraries or our push service or anything like that. You're free to use whatever it is that you want. So if that's APNS and FCM, you can do that. We have documentation on it. Or if it's another third-party service like OneSignal, you can do exactly that as well. And then really quick, before I wrap things up, I did want to mention some really exciting news, which is our upcoming release of Expo Application Services. Mentioned it a couple times, EAS for short. This is Expo's kind of brand new suite of cloud services that we're going to be launching pretty soon. And it will be all services that are compatible with any project. So if you're in the Expo managed workflow, the Bear workflow, just a regular React Native project that's never used anything from Expo before, it'll work straight in your app. And the first two services that will be available are EAS Build and EAS Submit. So both are pretty self-explanatory. Build lets you build and sign your apps in the cloud, and is much more extensible than our last build service in that you can use all the custom native code that you want. And then with Submit, you can send your apps right to the stores right after building, and makes just that whole kind of workflow really seamless. So EAS lends itself really well to automation and CI/CD, which we'll be hearing a talk from Cedric on later. So not today though. So basically it all just makes it so you can iterate faster than you could before. And these are all just like the first services to come. EAS will have a whole suite eventually. And then once we officially release over the next couple of days or weeks, EAS will offer a free tier so that way you can try out everything and make sure it works really well for you and your team and your project before you give us a dime. And if you're interested in trying EAS out early, then you should visit expo.dev/EAS, and you can sign up for the preview and kind of get a taste of all the features now. And that's it. So thanks everyone for listening. I hope you learned something. And I guess I'm happy to answer any questions right now about notifications or EAS or Expo in general.
Thank you so much for that talk, Charlie, on the notifications. That was a really good one. So yeah, just before I dive into some of the questions we've had in the chat, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about how you found your love for React Native and how you got into Expo, and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, it's a little bit interesting, I guess. So I actually graduated like not in computer science or anything like that, with a mechanical engineering degree, and then kind of like just wanted to get into programming afterwards. So I was doing the usual like self-taught thing, and eventually stumbled on this course for React Native from CS50, which I'm sure is a course that like a whole bunch of people have taken or are familiar with. And Charlie Cheever, one of Expo's founders, did like a guest talk in this course. And I was like, oh, wow, this like looks so cool. What a great tool. So I sent them an email, and yeah, the rest is like kind of history. Just started working at Expo a couple of years ago.
Awesome. That's awesome to hear. I think most of the stories you hear from people getting into something they love, just, you don't have to have a degree in it. It's just a passion. So,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. And it's also just crazy to like send an email to some company with like not really an expectation of whether or not someone will end up reading it. And then like you hear back and all that kind of stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So let's jump into some of the questions. So we had I'll start with a question from Mo Kazali, who's actually a fellow Theodo UK. He asked, does the Expo notification library also handle local notifications? It'd be really cool to handle all the notifications in one place, in one tool.
Yeah, so it actually both does two things. So all of those kind of listeners that I was going through and talking about apply to both local and push notifications the same. So you don't have to do like two different listeners in that case, which is really nice. And then on the flip side, it also exposes a ton of functionality for scheduling those local notifications themselves. And we have a whole bunch of different triggers that you can choose from, like time-based, calendar-based, a ton of things like that. So yeah, super easy.
I guess actually just to follow up from my part on that one, is there an easy way to differentiate between push and local?
Like from a developer standpoint or like a user standpoint? Yeah, there's like some field in the notification content that you receive like in that callback that you could find something out. I forget exactly what it is. I think the ID might take a different format also, but that's kind of sideways.
Yeah. Cool. Nice. All Okay, we've got another question from Alexi Kim. Sorry if I murdered your name there, but basically he says, is it possible for the app to handle push notifications if the app is not running, not just backgrounded, for example, after a phone reboot?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like if the app is completely killed, for instance, I don't know if there is a way natively to do this. I would assume there's probably some way, but the Expo notifications library doesn't expose that functionality right now. I know that we support, it's like alert messages, like basically very important, or like SOS messages, but I don't think that those will wake the app even if it's killed.
Okay, so there's no way, let's say you restart your device, or sorry, have your device off for a bit, turn your device on. There's no way to sort of get previous notifications that have been sent off.
So the notifications should actually come through. Both the native notification services handle that, like whether you used Expo or OneSignal or anything really, the notifications will come through even if your app was off. What I was talking about is, let's say I was using some app and then completely killed it, like swiped it up so that it's not even running in the background. If I send if I get a notification to this app, that whole background notification handling task that we talked about will not be run. The app needs to have been opened and not be completely killed in order for the JavaScript to spin up.
I see. Okay, super interesting. Hopefully hopefully with the native side, they'll make it easier to sort of implement that. And then
with how like sandboxing has been going and battery out, like basically permissions have been getting more granular as we've been seeing like mobile mature more and more. So I think doing things that are a little bit more like intensive on the battery or privacy in general, like launching apps without the user having specifically said launch this app, is just going to get more and more difficult as we move forward. But that's just my assumption.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see which direction it goes in. So we got another question from Mo, and he says, how would you recommend integrating EAS into an existing project? Is there a way to incrementally start using it without having a massive migration project?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So depending on if you're using Expo build already, like our classic Expo build service, or just you have like a regular React Native project, it's kind of different. So a regular React Native project is the easiest. You should download EAS CLI and run EAS build, and Expo will do all the setup for you to get like a development build going and kind of debug it the same way you would if you were building through Xcode. Investigate the logs if there's an error, and let us know if you think it's an error on our side or on yours. Expo CLI also exposes kind of the same functionality that EAS runs in the cloud for you to debug things locally. I should link to the docs in the chat, but this is through a command called expo run and then :iOS or :Android, depending on your platform. And that's going to do all the same things basically in the cloud. So it's a really good way to debug. For an Expo kind of managed project that's been using our classic build service, we have a doc that takes you step by step through the hiccups. Same process, download EAS CLI, run EAS build. And as long as you followed that doc, I've seen people finish the migration in under an hour. So it's really, really easy for managed apps too.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome stuff to hear. Deb, do you have any questions for Charlie? Or
Yeah, I do have like two questions. One would be like, does the Expo notification support like sticky notifications? Can you do them?
What do you mean by sticky notifications?
The ones that you actually like cannot just swipe and like ignore. So for instance, if you want them until you can press, you have to actively just press one of the action buttons.
I see. You know, I am not 100% sure, but if I check the docs in like 2 seconds, yes. So we do. To paint some more color here, the local notifications that you can schedule kind of provide a couple more options as for like configurability options. than the Expo push service does itself. Obviously, FCM exposes these options, but this is an example, a really good example of a situation where you would use FCM directly instead of the Expo push service, because you can add that like sticky Boolean, but Expo doesn't support it right now. So you can use it in local notifications for sure. And then you can use it with FCM, but you can't use it with the Expo push service.
Oh, thanks. And then another one is there any like retry mechanism already like built in, or would like in the case that, oh, I want to retry a notification that failed to reach the user, I would have like to get this, the status and then retry?
Yeah, you would have to handle that in your server code. So like, let's say Expo responds with like some 500 error, meaning something happened on our server that was a problem. We usually recommend people just add in retry logic that exponentially backs off at the same time to make sure your notifications get through in the end. As long as you have received an okay from Expo, you don't need to worry about any retry logic. Like we handle that and the native push servers handle that. So hopefully that answers your question. Two really hard questions. Thank you for the challenge.
I was just wondering, actually, to add to Deb's first question, what is it about not having the extra configurable options with the Expo push service? Is that because you guys are you'd have to basically rewrite the API for FCM, for instance?
It's not that we would have to rewrite the API. It's about right now, Expo's push service, like the options we expose are cross-platform, like basically all of them. And so we're kind of wary about adding in platform-specific options like sticky that has no related one on the iOS side, because what happens is, one platform will have a feature and then the other platform will add it in a year later or a couple months later. Like the tracking transparency framework that iOS added recently, well, Android's working on the same thing. And so if we add in support for this configuration option early on when only one platform supports it, we kind of have to like either rename it or remap it for the other push service once it releases. So we basically just want to be sure with what we're doing and creating a sustainable API that isn't going to have any breaking changes in the future. So that's really the risk that we're running by adding support for something really early on or before there's kind of cross-platform support for it.
Yeah, I guess it's about taking away, abstracting away the fact that there are two different services that you're using and making it just life easier for the dev.
Yeah, because you don't want to be sending requests with like 18, like a JSON object with like 18 key value pairs when all you're sending is like a hello message, Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. So I think we've had a good amount of questions there. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Deb to take it away with her accessibility talk.
So, hi everyone, I'm really excited to be talking today about mobile accessibility basics. So, which means building projects focused on all users. So, before we start, just a quick intro. So, my name is Deborah, or Deb for short, and I've been working at Fielder UK for about like 1 year and 9 months. So right now I'm architect developer. So Ben has introduced Fielder UK before, but yeah, we are a web and mobile development agency. And I've been an accessibility, or A11 for short, enthusiast for a long time. It's a topic I really enjoy, I appreciate, I find it's really important. And yeah, this is why I want to share like some of my recent learnings. And my GitHub and Twitter handles are the same, so Deborah Ornellas. And yeah, let's get started. What we will be covering today. So main 4 points would be, what is mobile accessibility? So the basics about it, some common issues that we may face, like users may face in mobile application about accessibility, some concepts and quick wins that we can get to know and then apply in our projects, and how can we developers be a part of the change for the better. Cool. So starting with what is mobile accessibility, I wanted to first start with a sentence that I think is really powerful, which is access to information, including the internet, is considered a human right by the United Nations. So this is present in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This has been ratified by most countries in the world, including the UK. So yeah, what is mobile accessibility then? I really like the Mozilla, the MDN definition on web accessibility. I adapted it a little bit to say that mobile accessibility is the practice of making your mobile applications usable by as many people as possible. And so I guess all users, this includes users with disabilities. And some important acronyms that we may find when studying this topic, when applying accessibility to a project, are the W3C, so the World Wide Web Consortium. And they have this initiative that is called the Web Accessibility Initiative. And this initiative has developed guidelines that are considered like if you ever need to, for your website to be considered accessible, where you go see the WCAG standard. It is an international standard, and for most countries that have laws related to websites being accessible, they are based on the WCAG guidelines. Right now, the latest version is the 2.1. That is a 2.2 version that may be released soon. But yeah, and there are also like 3 levels of compliance, A, AA, and AA, and 3As, which I would say like the gold standard, the go-to if your website or mobile application need to be accessible would be the AA. Some stats about how many people use mobile phones and how many people are disabled in the world in the UK. So around like 2/3 of the global population are phone users, and roughly 1 in 7 people have disabilities, which is a non-negligible proportion of people. For the UK, it's interesting. I didn't find the stats on unique phone users, but I found that we have around like almost 100% of the population worth of mobile connections, phone connections. And the disabled population is roughly 1 in 5 people, so 20% of the population. It's definitely like, I guess no one wants to ignore 20% of the population when designing and building apps. So now going to types of disabilities, I guess one common misconception that we may have when thinking about disabilities is we tend to think in many cases about permanent ones as being the only types of disabilities there are. But no, there's also, we need to always factor in temporary and situational disabilities. This is an image that I really enjoy from the Microsoft Inclusive 101 Toolkit, which is a great learning resource about inclusive design. So we can see that, for instance, touch disability can be permanent. So a person that has one arm, it can be temporary for someone that has a broken arm or it's injured arm, or it can be situational, like a mother with their newborn baby, and she can also only use one arm. So one app that is accessible for touch type disabilities are going to help not only the person with permanent disabilities, but everyone that has temporary or situational disabilities as well. So what are the common issues that users may face with accessibility. So non-inclusive design. What happens when we developers only use our own point of view when designing and developing apps? So this is a quote that I also took from the toolkit. If we use our own abilities and biases as a starting point, we end up with products that are designed for people with specific gender, age, language ability, tech literacy, and physical ability, and they tend to be the same as ours. So it ends up meaning that we're likely excluding other people from enjoying the same experience that we are with these applications. So common issues with mobile apps in terms of accessibility. We are going to go more into detail on how to fix most of them, but they will be low contrast colors, small touch areas, inaccessible forms, low support for voiceover, can come, for instance, because of a lack of area labels, no support for pinch zooming in and out, or too much reliance on high-speed connection, because having a low-speed connection can also be a type of situational disability. What are the consequences of this? Users with disabilities will have trouble loading content, understanding content, maybe navigating through views, performing the actions that you really wanted them to do, or maybe using your app at all. Like they may just think that it's not worth the trouble and uninstall your app and go for another one if there's an accessible alternative. So, okay, now I've chosen a few, like of course there are many accessibility concepts and many ways and actions to fix issues, but I chose some of the main ones. I guess first starting with color. Color contrast is one of the most, I guess when you search about accessibility basics, color contrast is one of the main topics you're going to find. And the criteria that we have in the WCAG guidelines is that the minimum contrast should be a proportion of 4.5 per 1 for small text and 3 per 1 for large text. And then I've seen this a couple of times and I always wondered, what does it mean? And what it means, thanks W3C, they explained that it's the ratio between the relative luminance of the lighter of the colors and for the relative luminance of the darker one. So I guess the highest contrast that you can have, it would be like black and white. So black text on white background or vice versa. And here we have like two examples. I took those from the Android guidelines on contrast between like text and background that is okay and not okay. So here comes our first quick win. It would be, especially if you have access, if you are building your own project, or if you are a UX UI designer, or if you have access to your UX and UI designers before the color palette is agreed on, or if you can easily change, test your app colors for accessibility before defining a palette, because this can make a huge difference for the visibility, for the readability of your content. And sometimes it's not really obvious. Again, like if we think, if we try to design from our own points of view, we may end up just think, oh, this works for me. So for instance, some of the examples on the non-legible examples, to me, they look all right, but they will not necessarily look all right to all users. So it's really important to have this like neutral point of view of going through a color contrast tool and testing it and making sure they adhere to the guidelines. Still talking about like color. So one, like as developers, we love dark mode. We use dark mode, like most of us. I don't want to say for everyone, but most of us use dark mode in many apps. But one interesting thing is like dark mode is something that is not a nice to have or just for aesthetics. Like if you can provide dark mode on your app, especially if your app has like very big like text, many lines of text, or it requires extensive reading from your users, it will help, because some users may struggle reading over light backgrounds. And a quick win about, so I would say most modern fonts have the possibility in their accessibility tools to set the screen colors to be grayscale or inverted colors. So you can try it on, you can find on your phone how to set it to grayscale, for instance. I recommend, I tried it recently, and it's really, it's a quick win, an easy way to test your app for color accessibility. Set your phone to grayscale, go to your app, check, is it still usable? Was the app relying on colors somehow to communicate error messages or some sort of message that now is lost because there's no color anymore? And this leads us to the last, the last point about color. Yeah, don't rely on color to display any sort of message, because even if the font is set to all colors, there are users that have visual impairments and that they cannot distinguish colors from one another. So there's a change. So for instance, in this image from the Android accessibility guidelines, if a user cannot distinguish red from green, it means that this feature is completely useless for them. And it's a complete shame. They may give up on using the app. Cool. So one slide about media. So how to make media, if your app has many images or audios and videos, how to make them more accessible. For images, if your image is informative, if the content is important for the comprehension of whatever you're trying to show the user, add array labels with a short, concise text that informs what you want. So when the users are using screen readers, the screen readers can capture and inform like what you wanted with this image. You don't need to add array label to decorative images. You shouldn't add even. And for audios and videos, always include the option to toggle captions. Provide a transcript whenever possible, and do not autoplay sound or video when someone opens an app or a new view, because it may be distracting for many users. So yeah, here in the picture, we have a good example, which comes from the WCAT website. Thankfully, they are compliant and they offer the option to toggle captions on and off. So for the keyboard, another quick win is to use the correct touch screen keyboard, depending on the user input type. So this is quite quick. So on React Native, how do you do this? You can use the keyboard type props of text input. It's really super simple and it makes a huge difference. So I listed there like the options. There are cross-platform, but there are also a few Android specific and iOS specific options for the type. And here we can see some examples. So if we use the default, it's going to be the default keyboard. But if we use the numeric one, like the right keyboard appears, and it helps a lot for users that need big touch types, which is it saves them time and it makes their life easier. Same for email address is another example. Next one would be fonts and font sizes. So another quick win would be choosing relative CSS units for font size instead of pixels. So if you use EM or REM and your users zoom in and out, because this is like many users require zooming in and zooming in to be able to read the content, your layout will be preserved and everything's gonna work correctly. And you're not gonna if not, it's gonna probably be a surprise and your layout may be destroyed. So yeah, people are gonna be able to magnify the test without loss of content. And about accessible fonts, no perfect choice. I guess the guidelines would be, try to avoid fonts that are too complex. Try to avoid fonts that have like character ambiguity. So for instance, the I and the L are quite similar, or things like this. And using too many fonts in the same page may also be distracting and overwhelming for some users. So one of the, I guess, worst ways in which an app can be unaccessible, like and not comply with accessibility guidelines, would be like with forms, because so many important actions that we have to go through day to day in apps and in websites as well go through filling and sending forms. And a quick win that is really, really important is to not only rely on placeholders for information in forms. It's really important to use the label as well. So I mean, for every user, if you only rely on placeholder text, it is going to disappear as soon as you start typing text. And then you're going to need to rely on the user's short-term memory to remember, okay, what was it that it said? Or they're going to have to go back and forth and delete the text, which is not great UX. But it's even worse for speech output users, because they cannot easily infer what the form element is by looking at the surrounding content. And I guess how to do it in React Native. The text input component doesn't have a label prop, but what you can do is use the text native component, like from React Native, and to set like the label, and then you can of course like style it and create your own, but it's really important to have them for every input. And the last concept that I wanted to talk about like in this section would be like buttons. But I guess buttons, it would be better to say touch areas, touch elements. So it's you need to, I saw it written somewhere else, like you need to design for fat fingers, but I guess you need to design thinking that clicking on, like touching small elements can be really painful for all users. So the general guidelines is that you provide a minimal touch area of 48 density independent pixels by 48. Even if the icon button is smaller than this, it's not a problem. If the icon is smaller, you just need to provide this extra area that is also touchable. And then also ensure that they are separated by at least 8 density independent pixels. But also it's really important that they are not too big and cramped one after another, because it's important that our apps have some space that is non-touchable to allow for scrolling. Why it is? Because some users may have mobility issues that may make them click areas that they don't want to. And it's really important that all users can navigate your app without being concerned all the time that they are going to be redirected to somewhere they don't want, or they're going to activate something that they don't want, and while they just wanted to scroll their app. And so yeah, so this was it for the section about like quick wins and concepts. So I wanted to talk now about like how can we as developers contribute to accessibility? How can we be a part of this positive like change and make sure that it's not an afterthought, it's not something that we have to fix and then becomes expensive in the future, but we do, as we think of it, as really like a core part of our job. So I came with 4 points, 4 suggestions. The first one is getting input from more people during the development process. It goes back to that to the inclusive design. So not only developing from our point of view, but listening to users with disabilities, and And then some many UX and UI designers, they have been trained about like accessibility guidelines in terms of inclusive design. And if you are not sure, like if your team is not sure whether the app is accessible or not, if you meet the standards or not, it's I guess it's always better to be safe than sorry and hire accessibility experts or an accessibility audit, because then you're going to be like confident that your app actually meets the level of accessibility you want. The second suggestion would be including accessibility testing into the development pipeline. So there are many tools available, various free tools, like Googling for them, like so many resource pages. It's even a bit like overwhelming to see how many free resources there are for accessibility testing. So one that I wanted to highlight that I tried on was the accessibility scanner app from Android. The Android app is free, it's easy to set up, and I guess in 10 minutes I was already like able to go and test it on both Duolingo and Calm, which are two apps I use on a daily basis. And it's I don't want to throw any of them like under the bus, and but it's just to show how even like well-established and loved apps can also like benefit from like quick wins fixes. So Duolingo had a low contrast icon, and Calm could increase the height of the touch target. And this is something like, for instance, accessibility scanner you can use if your app is already installed, even if it's in the development phase, but it's already, you already can install in a physical device, you could use it right away. Then the third suggestion would be fixing accessibility issues that are detected as a priority. And then I know, a caveat, I know that developers don't always have the final say on what is a priority or not. But sometimes we do, sometimes we have like the power to say, okay, I think this issue out of all of the issues that we can fix right now, this one should be fixed right now because it's a priority. And if you are building your own personal project, then of course you have control of the roadmap and the backlog. So why making your app usable by all users is the right thing to do. But if this is not enough of an argument, like if your app is not accessible, you may be blocking people from using your service right now. You may be losing the potential or long-term users if they just give up using it. And you may even, in some cases, be fined. And then finally, I guess another way that we can help and contribute to this change, and making apps accessible, is to learn about it and sharing the knowledge. So hopefully, like knowledge I just shared today has been useful for at least one person. But yeah, some resources that I really recommend, they are like beginner friendly and like really interesting. Nothing boring. It's really like interactive. Is like the Microsoft Inclusive 101 toolkit. For color palette tools, I found at least five of them, but the Material UI one was the one I liked the most. The accessibility scanner app that I mentioned before, it would be, also my choice to like try on one scanner app and try on with like multiple apps that you have. The A11y project checklist is great. Really great if you want to if you have an existing app or web app as well, you want to see like how well you're doing right now. It's a great checklist. And then finally, you can dedicate 10 minutes to get to know your phone accessibility settings. So for instance, turn on voiceover or talkback, depending on whether you're using iOS or Android. Set your colors to grayscale, high contrast, inverse colors, and see how it looks like, how your favorite apps look like now. And try on voice commands to see as well like how some users with disabilities use their phones. I highly recommend this. it's like really eye-opening, and yeah, hopefully it will make you as excited about like accessibility as I am. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Looking forward to like hearing questions if you have some.
Thank you so much, Deb, for that super insightful talk on accessibility. I think accessibility is something that's quite easily forgotten, especially in personal projects. If you're trying to make something quickly and design something yourself, it's very easy to skip over things that just it doesn't cross your mind. So it's definitely a question for me, and actually AS, I think, as well in the chat. Basically, what made you become so passionate about accessibility?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was there was a time where I had like this Twitter craze thing where I followed a lot of people at the same time, like many web development influencers, and some of them are really passionate about accessibility. And I guess like hearing a lot from them, I don't want to like murder anyone's names, so I will like probably refrain from trying to just remember who they were. But yeah, I guess like following people on Twitter like about like front-end development and seeing how passionate they were, like also made me like study a bit more about it. And the more you learn about it, like you see videos of people using how people with disability uses their apps, and you think, wow, that's fascinating. That's so different from how I use it. So yeah, it keeps like the interest keeps growing.
Yeah. It seems like it's almost like exposure. So you followed so many people on Twitter that you had so many feeds and so many tweets about accessibility that it just encouraged you to start thinking about it more. Seems like a really good way of learning about something, right? Just filling your life with it. So cool. Yeah, there was actually a question from Mo. I think it was just before the slide you said about testing your app in grayscale for the contrast. But he asked, is there any tool that you'd recommend to run the app colors through a contrast test? Obviously, there was that other app that you mentioned that can do that. Are there any other tools that you would recommend for a contrast test or accessibility in general?
So yeah, so the material UI one I mentioned, I don't think it's the best one to actually run your app like through. I think it's great if you want to test like some, oh, I want to add a new color to my palette for some reason. So I think it's more focused on designers. I think it's the best one to learn about color contrast and how I can almost like break your misconceptions about contrast. But I found at least like, I don't remember from the top of my head the names of the scanners, but there are at least 3 or 4 that I found when researching for my presentation. So there are a few.
Okay. I mean, that kind of leads on nicely to a question that I thought of while you were doing your presentation. And it was, while you're developing an app, do you know if there are any tools that you can use, like linting, for example, for accessibility rules? So if you forget, for instance, to put on a keyboard type on your input, could you have a linter saying, hey, you've forgotten to do this? Is that something you know about?
That's a great question. I just found one today, like when searching about it, and it's yeah, I can search for but yeah, it was from Formidable Labs, and it's for ESLint, like a plugin, and it looks really good, great. I don't remember if I saw any specific rules about the keyboard type, but I saw some about like ARIA labels and roles, so it really looked really good.
That's awesome, because devs are lazy and we like being told what to do, even if that's by a linter, right? So yeah, there's actually another question from Alexa Kim, and they said, is there any way to support responsive units from the web world, so REM and EM, in React Native?
That's a good question. I feel like there is, but it's been like a while since I actually like was on a React Native project. I'm almost sure that when I the last project I did like used relative units, but I don't want to like sorry, I can't really like, don't quote me on this. I can't really provide like a final answer to that.
That's fair enough. It's a tough question. I mean, I think given that you don't specify pixel values in React Native, it kind of goes to the pixel density of the phone that you're using. I mean, I guess that's sort of a halfway, but it's not quite REM and EM from the web world. But yeah, that's kind of cool stuff. Yeah, actually, so regarding one of your slides about how you can contribute, is there actually a way you can submit stuff to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or you can contact them to do something like that?
They have a page about like how to contribute. I think you start like if you want to attend some of the meetings, you can like maybe I'm not sure how easy it is to actually like get to the point where you can contribute, but I know that the 2.2 guidelines are being prepared, so I would guess like they do have a page. I saw it like quite recently how to help like contribute to the WAI, so the initiative, like how to be a part of it. And I imagine they are hosting some meetings about the 2.2 proposal.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Okay, that's awesome to hear. Charlie, do you have any questions as well for Deb on accessibility?
Yeah, I do. First of all, it was like such an interesting talk, because this is something that I think I also don't think about as much. So it's good to hear. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was talking about like the inherent biases we have when we're developing like our app. Like we develop it for ourselves, not really for anyone else. And so like besides a linter and or getting more reviewers on the PR, for instance, like had you personally, since getting into accessibility, noticed like some habits that help you to train to kind of keep it more front of mind as you're developing?
That's a really good question. I guess it's difficult, right? Like because I think with it's a mindset shift that we can apply like to everything. It's quite hard, like trying to think what are the users going to think of this feature and not like really what I think. I personally tend to get like a bit like emotionally attached to the products I develop. So it's, I guess, if you train in general to try to think, okay, I'm building something for the world and not for myself, this helps. This is also going to help with accessibility in the sense that then you're going to think, okay, maybe like, is this button clear enough? Is this message like good enough? Like, is the I am used because I just like every time when I debug this workflow, I am used to doing this and this and this and that. But is a user actually going to find this intuitive? And so yeah, I can't think of anything like specific more than using the tools for accessibility, but I guess this general mindset shift can be helpful.
Yeah, just because it's something that I think you really have to like train yourself for. So it's definitely difficult to keep front of mind. But yeah, the only other question I had was how can you like dark mode?
That's a good, I think it took me some time to get used to, but I noticed like I have trouble like reading long like pieces of text like in a row. I realized that it gets less painful when it's on dark mode. So I guess it was like actually like this usability thing. Yeah, I guess I was like, oh, actually it tires my eyes a bit less and I can go for it more. Like, but I think it's also like because people say it's good, it contributes. Like it's a bit like the hype of
yeah.
What if I use like I like in my project there are people that use IntelliJ in white mode and they are judged instantly. You can feel like the judgment when the white mode comes into the screen share. So there's a bit of like this
Yeah,
But
yeah. My VS Code is in light mode, and every time I see like a dark mode one, I get so confused. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? But to each their own. To each their own.
I'm with Deb on this one, so you're outnumbered here, Joe.
Thought so.
Yeah. Actually, regarding your first question, Charlie, just to build on that, Deb, do you think there's anything like before actually debbing on a project and before implementing? So when it's being designed, do you think there's anything that you have done on a personal project, like, I don't know, market research, for instance, on how you can design your app better without biases from yourself? So, you know, if I was going to do it, I don't want to target my app just towards men of my age, you know, the other criteria that I might just subconsciously put in. Yeah, are there ways that you would recommend to prevent that from happening?
I guess I don't have a lot of like examples from personal projects, but I would say it's impossible for us to get rid of our biases. Like, it's human, it's natural. So the main thing I would recommend, if it matters to you, it's talking to other people, showing the app, the design to other people, especially if there's a way to reach to people with disabilities and try to get them to test. So there may be like groups or like entities, like organizations that do testing, that do testing, especially because they want apps to be accessible for everyone. So yeah, I think it's a good way to it's a good thing to keep this at the back of your mind, like, oh, okay, I need to not go straight into the most comfortable route of doing what looks good to me, but then I get like talking to other people, getting their inputs would be the way to go.
Yeah, so it sounds like kind of expanding your target audience, well, the testing audience as much as possible. Yeah. Is kind of a good way to do stuff like that. Cool. So I don't have any other questions. I don't think there's any other ones coming in from the chat. So maybe we'll wrap it up here. So thank you so much, Charlie and Deb, for your super interesting talks. Super excited for the React Native Meetup, and thank you for the community as well for putting on all your questions. We'll see you, haven't confirmed the date yet, but in December for our next React Native Meetup. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.